Aaliyah. Let's talk about flying for a second. A lot of people are terrified of it. That knot in your stomach during takeoff, the way your hands grip the armrest during turbulence. I get it. I feel it too. Statistically, flying is one of the safest ways to travel. Your odds of dying as a passenger in a plane crash? Roughly 1 in 10 to 15 million. You're far more likely to get hit by a car crossing the street to your mailbox. But statistics don't mean much when you're one of the unlucky ones. And in this video, we're going to talk about some very unlucky people. Celebrities who boarded aircraft expecting to land safely and never did. Starting with Aaliyah.
Hey,
On August 25th, 2001, Aaliyah was on top of the world. She had just wrapped filming for her music video, Rock the Boat, in the Bahamas. The 22-year-old R&B princess was tired but happy. Her scenes were done early, and she decided to fly back to Florida a day ahead of schedule. The original plan was to take the same, larger aircraft that had brought her to the island. But plans changed. Instead, her team chartered a smaller Cessna 402B, a decision that would prove fatal. The problem started before they even boarded. The plane was overloaded by about 700 pounds. There was one more passenger than the aircraft was certified to carry. And the pilot? Luis Morales III was working his first official day for the charter company. His logbooks were full of fabricated flight hours. He wasn't even qualified to fly this type of plane. And just 2 weeks earlier, he'd been arrested for possession of crack cocaine. The autopsy later found cocaine metabolites and alcohol in his system. Around 6:45 p.m., the overloaded Cessna began its takeoff roll at Marsh Harbor Airport. It was sluggish. The nose came up too steeply, fighting for altitude it couldn't gain. The plane reached maybe 40 feet before it banked hard to the left. The tail-heavy aircraft stalled, rolled, and dove nose first into a swamp just 200 feet past the end of the runway. The impact was catastrophic. Fire erupted almost instantly. Aaliyah and 5 others died on impact. Her bodyguard, Scott Gallen, was pulled from the wreckage still breathing. According to paramedics, his last words were asking about Aaliyah. He died shortly after. The coroner's report stated Aaliyah suffered severe burns and a blow to the head. She was in such profound shock that survival was never a possibility. Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper. February 3rd, 1959. The day the music died. It's a phrase everyone knows, but the story behind it is a brutal lesson in bad decisions and worse luck. Buddy Holly was 22. Ritchie Valens was 17. J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson was 28. They were all exhausted, freezing, and sick of a broken-down tour bus with no heat. The Winter Dance Party Tour was a nightmare. 24 days of crisscrossing the frozen Midwest in a bus that kept breaking down. Musicians were getting sick. Buddy Holly had had enough. After their show at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa, he chartered a small Beechcraft Bonanza to fly to the next stop. The plane had 4 seats, 1 for the pilot, 1 for Holly, and 2 more. This is where fate stepped in. The Big Bopper, suffering from the flu, begged Waylon Jennings to give up his seat. Jennings agreed. For the last seat, Ritchie Valens and guitarist Tommy Alsop flipped a coin. Valens won. He was thrilled. He'd never flown in a small plane before. As Holly boarded, Jennings jokingly said, "I hope your plane crashes." Holly shot back, "I hope your bus freezes up." It was the last thing they ever said to each other. The pilot, Roger Peterson, was just 21. He had experience, but not enough. He wasn't fully instrument rated, and the weather was terrible. Snow, low clouds, near zero visibility. Shortly after midnight on February 3rd, the Bonanza took off into a black void. Within minutes, Peterson became disoriented. He couldn't tell up from down. The plane entered a descending right turn and slammed into a frozen cornfield at high speed. There was no distress call. All 4 were killed instantly, their bodies thrown from the wreckage into the snow. The search party found them the next morning, scattered across a white field, a guitar lying in the snow beside the twisted metal. Stevie Ray Vaughan, August 27th, 1990. Stevie Ray Vaughan had just played the show of his life, an all-star jam session at Alpine Valley Music Theater in Wisconsin, alongside Eric Clapton, Robert Cray, and others. The encore ended around 12:50 a.m. Backstage, the energy was electric. Vaughan was clean, sober, and at the peak of his powers. The plan was simple. Hop on a helicopter and fly to Chicago. 4 helicopters were lined up on the golf course behind the venue, ready to shuttle the artists out. Vaughan climbed into the third one, a Bell 206B Jet Ranger, along with his agent and his tour manager. The pilot, Jeff Brown, was experienced with this helicopter, but he had one critical gap. He only had an instrument rating for fixed-wing aircraft, not helicopters. And the weather that night was treacherous. Dense fog, low clouds, almost no visibility. The helicopters took off one by one, heading for Chicago. Brown's helicopter lifted off and banked left, climbing into the murky darkness. But Alpine Valley is surrounded by hills, ski slopes, and Brown couldn't see them. Within a minute or two of takeoff, the helicopter flew directly into a 300-foot ski hill at roughly 100 miles per hour. There was no warning, no distress call. The aircraft disintegrated on impact. The other helicopters made it to Chicago. When the third one never arrived, a search was launched. At 7 a.m., they found the wreckage scattered up the slope. All 5 men were dead. The autopsy confirmed Vaughan died instantly from massive internal trauma. There were no drugs or alcohol in his system.
Nope. Just
a clear-headed, 35-year-old guitar legend, killed by fog, a hill, and a pilot who couldn't see what was right in front of him. Randy Rhoads. This one is infuriating. Randy Rhoads didn't die in a plane crash. He died because of a stunt. A stupid, reckless, completely avoidable stunt. On the morning of March 19, 1982, the Ozzy Osbourne tour bus was parked at Flying Baron Estates in Leesburg, Florida. They'd stopped to fix the air conditioning. On the property was a small airstrip and a Beechcraft Bonanza. The bus driver, Andrew Aycock, was also a licensed pilot. And that morning, he decided to take the plane for a joyride, without the owner's permission, with cocaine in his system. He took keyboardist Don Airey and tour manager Jake Duncan up first, buzzing the tour bus at low altitude, trying to wake up the sleeping band members. They landed safely. Then he went up again, this time with Randy Rhoads and 58-year-old seamstress Rachel Youngblood. Randy was terrified of flying, but he got on the plane anyway. Aycock took off and started making low passes over the bus again, lower and lower each time. On the third pass, he clipped the bus with the left wing. The impact tore the wing apart. The plane cartwheeled over the bus, sheared through a pine tree, and slammed into the garage of a nearby house. A fireball erupted instantly. Sharon Osbourne was asleep in the bus when it happened. She later described the scene as body parts everywhere. Randy Rhoads was 25 years old. He was identified by his dental records and his jewelry. The NTSB report is damning. Unauthorized use of the aircraft, reckless low-altitude maneuvers, pilot under the influence of cocaine. There was no mechanical failure, no bad weather, just a man showing off, and 3 people who paid for it with their lives. Lynyrd Skynyrd, October 20th, 1977. Lynyrd Skynyrd was at the height of their fame. Their album Street Survivors had just been released. They were on tour, flying from Greenville, South Carolina to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in a chartered Convair CV-240. The plane was old, a relic from the 1950s, and it had problems. The right engine had been torching, spitting flames from the exhaust, a sign of irregular fuel combustion and dangerously high fuel consumption. The band knew about it. They flew anyway. The plan was to get the engine fixed in Baton Rouge, but they never made it. The crew didn't monitor the fuel gauges properly. They didn't account for the extra consumption from the faulty engine. Somewhere over Mississippi, the needles started dropping toward empty. By the time they realized the danger, it was too late. Around 6:42 p.m., both engines flamed out. The Convair became a glider. The pilots tried to find an open field, but they were over dense forest and swampland near Gillsburg, Mississippi. The plane descended through the trees, tearing itself apart. The fuselage ripped open. Bodies were thrown into the woods. 6 people died. Lead singer Ronnie Van Zant, guitarist Steve Gaines, backup singer Cassie Gaines, assistant road manager Dean Kilpatrick, and both pilots. 20 others survived, but with horrific injuries. Drummer Artemis Pyle, bleeding and broken, crawled through the forest to a nearby farmhouse to get help. The NTSB report was blunt: fuel exhaustion due to crew inattention. The band had been warned about the plane. They ignored the warnings, and they paid the ultimate price. Roberto Clemente. Roberto Clemente was a hero. Not just on the baseball field, where he was a legend for the Pittsburgh Pirates, but off it too. On December 23, 1972, a massive earthquake devastated Managua, Nicaragua. Clemente immediately organized relief efforts from Puerto Rico, sending planes loaded with food, medicine, and clothing. But he heard disturbing reports. The supplies were being stolen by corrupt officials. They weren't reaching the people who needed them. So Clemente decided to go himself. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1972, he boarded a Douglas DC-7 cargo plane at Isla Verde International Airport in San Juan. The plane was old, poorly maintained, and overloaded with relief supplies. The crew was questionable. But Clemente didn't care. He was determined to make sure the aid got through. Around 9:20 p.m., the DC-7 began its takeoff roll on runway 08. The 4 propeller engines strained under the weight. The plane lifted off, but it was struggling. Almost immediately, something went wrong. Witnesses reported engine trouble, asymmetric thrust. The aircraft couldn't climb. Seconds after takeoff, it lost altitude and plunged into the Atlantic Ocean, about a mile off the coast. There were no survivors. Search and rescue teams found wreckage in some of the crew, but Roberto Clemente's body was never recovered. He was 38 years old, with exactly 3,000 career hits. 3 months later, the Baseball Hall of Fame waived its 5-year waiting period and inducted him posthumously. He remains a symbol of selflessness, a man who died trying to help strangers.